It's funny if you do that, you might uncover opportunities, right?
Yeah.
Or to think differently.
I think indeed. But every once you should really try out something a bit extreme. Just to learn. Maybe really say for a year I will not fly at all. Let's see what happens. Again, you can do that maybe. But I mean, I've many colleagues that now are really trying to seriously question their flying, which is for academic has been the most obvious things to do, and really but also just to understand what am I losing? Are there alternatives or not alternatives? Again, the point should not be nobody can be pure. We are all part of this world, but to try things that are different enough to really learn something new, not to do what everybody knows. I mean, some things are obvious. And we should do that, eat less meat, fly less, this and that. But everyone tries something a bit crazier, just to explore possibilities, not to say that's the solution or I can do it. Maybe after a few weeks you say, no, that's too much for me. But you have learned something about you and so about the world, because we are all parts of the world.
It's a good one.
Yeah, I hope people who listen will be like, okay. Hi, and welcome back to Popping Bubbles podcast. I'm your host, Lisa.
And I'm Stefan. And today we're doing episode 2 of our season 2 on circularity. And we have 2 wonderful guests here today, Luca Bertolini and Sarah Wilkin. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks.
It's nice to have you guys. Thank you for joining. If you could maybe just quickly introduce yourself for those who are listening, just what you do and maybe how you ended up in the field of sustainable mobility.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. Sarah Wilkin is my name, founder and CEO of Fly Green Alliance. So I began the work that I was doing because actually I was working here in Amsterdam in the student hotel, it was called now, the Social Hub. And I was actually doing a bit of side research, and I started hearing this circular economy, and then I looked into it and thought, okay, well, we should be doing this, should we not? This makes a lot of sense. And that was like a project helping the CSR team in one while I was being a digital project manager. I then actually met a professor from the University of Amsterdam, and he was talking about circularity in a very different way, and he was telling me about recycling waste that could turn into aviation fuel. So I was like, wow, that's quite a big
How long ago was this?
Project. 2018. I remember sending Shiju Ravindran an email, and then we met that year. And actually, my flatmate at the time was working at Booking.com, and I was just really chatting about the meeting, and she said, "This is sustainable travel, and Booking.com have got our grant for this." So basically, that was the beginning of me having an interest, and definitely circular, but in a different way. Most people probably think of, products, but this was literally waste, hydrocarbons. So that then led me to writing a grant with Shiju Ravindran, and the whole of that 2018 year, I went into due diligence. I studied and literally learned all I can about renewable fuels. So that was it was a bit of a big shift for me, but I was kind of really thinking this work was important, of course. But you
still think that way?
Yes. But it was just a time when people were not really, there was some things happening, but it wasn't very mainstream. And then I actually met a friend who worked at the UN, and I was like, wow, she is doing really, important work. And it was about the SDGs and things like that. So it kind of just was a time when I was wanting to change my own career, and it came around, and I thought, yes, we definitely need to do this work. And then I sort of understood more about, the bigger topics. I was working in digital and advertising, so it was kind of just a very different sector. So, it was going back to academia and getting my studying again, so it was really interesting to me.
Cool. And Luca, I think that you're a professor in city urban development, correct?
Urban planning.
Urban planning.
Yeah.
Well, urban planning has been happening for a long time. So maybe you can tell a little bit about yourself and like also where the sustainability started to come in.
Yeah, I just started with my fascination with cities. Actually, I started as an architect, but then because I got fascinated by cities, I shift towards planning. And there I found also mobility as a crucial ingredient in cities, understanding how cities work, how you might change them. And then the other way around, actually, as well. Also to understand mobility, to understand how to change it, you need to understand cities. So then I became fascinated in this interaction, entanglement of cities and mobility. And then, of course, then you end up where we are now today in this issue of how to make mobility sustainable, which has been with us for quite some decades.
Okay. And how is the sustainable mobility doing right now? Where are we at?
Yeah, that's a good question.
How long have you got?
It's interesting. There was a couple of years ago, there was an article trying to make the balance in 30 years after this idea of sustainable mobility was introduced, where we are, and it's really a bit of a mixed assessment because you see awareness, you see all sorts of ideas what goes wrong, how could it be right, but you do not yet see signs of a fundamental change. Our mobility practices are still not sustainable. At the same time, we still depend on them as right. Individual, as society. That's a dilemma. That's why it's also so difficult to change. Actually, more than many other sectors, actually, it is the sector who has made the least progress towards sustainability of all other sectors, because it's so entangled in the way we live, in the way we organize our economies, that it's very difficult to change.
Yeah, we need to travel, essentially. I mean, we maybe go into this, but of course there are concepts like the 15-minute city, but as a nation...
What's the 15-minute city? Like,
so this is Luca is probably better placed to discuss this, but I'll briefly. It is so that everything in a community is within 15 minutes walk away. Is that? This is
walking or cycling. Yeah.
So a sustainable way that you've got your shops and your essentials basically, and then your community and your sports, and so you can have your life basically within 15 minutes. And actually Amsterdam probably does have that where we are currently, and that's probably been a part of the plan, maybe not like directly a 15 minutes, but that everything is within 15 minutes, I would say.
Yeah.
Do you think the effect of urban, like how many people are living in a specific area, influences if that is even possible? I mean, I think if you look at some of the villages here in the Netherlands, they definitely don't have everything within 15 minutes.
No, it depends, but talking about kind of the bigger aspect of some places will achieve that, and you will at least have a local shop so you can get food. So these very big, major essentials. But then as we get bigger and more busy, then of course as a nation we need to travel, and some nations have rail and some nations don't. Mm-hmm. Then we need shipping and we need planes, and we are transporting goods and people, and that is an industry, of course, in industries in itself and part of our economy and GDP.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. What I'm hearing, because I think the unique thing about mobility is it just keeps going, right? You can't just say let's stop it for a week and then.
We had a pandemic.
Yeah. But I mean, that's a good important point, because indeed what you have seen is mobility growing and growing. We have seen people and goods traveling further and further. And indeed, a lot of making mobility sustainable has been about, let's make that mobility sustainable, more efficient, shifting to different modes. But indeed, what you see more and more now, because it's really not been enough, is questioning the very question: do we need mobility in the first place, or at least do we need it with this intensity? And ideas like the 50-minute city are really about questioning this. Couldn't we have the same or even a higher quality of life traveling less, shorter distances, which then would allow using, for instance, cycling and walking instead of motorized transport?
I mean, of course, there's a debate, but I work with the aviation industry as well, so of course there is some of this. I think the statistics are 20% of all air travel is for cargo. So, are we going to literally home grow? Everything? You know, I mean, I don't think I think the consensus is by the fact that most of the airlines were at least bailed out by their own governments in some form, shows that from a government perspective, and you know, UN doesn't say not fly and things like that. So I think it is understood that travel will continue.
To grow or just at
I don't know. I would say, like everything, by the way, I think it's also a choice. You know, that's why I even the word trend I don't like. You know, of course there are forces leading in one or the other direction, but it's also we also have agency as societies, as individuals. So again, without denying forces that still push towards more and more mobility, you know, these are also choices that we make.
I mean, it is from a consumer or leisure point of view. Of course, it is a choice. And so what I should say is that I've set up we work in sustainable aviation fuel, but the work we're doing is sustainable mobility. And we are consultants and our membership to make sure that we are more sustainable in our travel. So we've got approaches, and of course, we created our CEO, a simple framework to follow: reduce, replace, consolidate, electrify, offset. So you can come up with your own frameworks, but it's a way to essentially think about how you can either not travel initially, or you walk, you cycle, like Amsterdam has been promoting for many decades. And of course, in other cities there are now cycle lanes and congestion charges. So there is many principles that are at least trying to make the air better quality, less cars in the city centre, more electric trams and bikes and things like that. And actually, the electric bike has displaced more cars than any other invention, at the moment, and things like this.
I saw this very interesting graph the other day, very randomly. It was about the modes of transport in different countries, and it was crazy. It was by continent base. How you see in the US, it's 90% cars.
I've just been to the US.
Is it true?
It's quite surprising. Well,
but I use a lot those graphics, those numbers also with students. And why are they interesting? Because of course we hear, it's inevitable. There's only one way. It's just a trend we have to accept. But the interesting thing is that we see huge differences in the world, even comparing countries with the same wealth, the same quality of life. So that's already an indication that, there is space for choice, for going in one or the other direction. I'm not saying it's easy, because again, there are historical reasons why the US is different than Europe, and you cannot, overnight transform the US in Europe or the other way around. But it means that there are, certainly for countries that are more developing now, there are different options, and maybe yet other options that are not even yet being explored by the US or Europe.
Yeah, I've been to a few different countries, so you can't really compare the US and Europe, even though we're similar market sizes. Europe has got really good rail systems, and actually everybody complains about the rail system, but it's really good. And having
every time.
I know, but then I've been to countries such as Colombia, where there isn't really rail, or I don't know if there's any rail at all, but then you're basically getting very long. But, you know, a bus journey can be 10, 14 hours and things like this. But and then I've been to Medellin, and they kind of pride themselves on having a transport system, and they've got a gondola system, and they've got a metro, and they're they're very proudly.
Really?
Yeah, I've discussed this compared to Bogota. Yeah. So it's just really, and then you would only fly, of course, if you're very wealthy. So it was just and then I kind of have these comparisons, of course, like I was saying about people complain about the trains. Like, it's just, you can't compare. And then in the US, there is trains actually, and people, I think there's a bit of a misconception that people can't get the train in the US. There's less, but it is really car-centric. You see people not getting out of the car to go to the bank. There's drive-through banks. My friend's children, you drive through and put the children in the car. The parents don't get out the car to collect the children. So it's just everything is literally designed for a car. So it's almost the opposite of a 15-minute city. It's 15-minute maybe in car. Because even with my friend, they had one car at the time in the family, and they were talking about getting another one. But I said, how far away is the shop? And they said, about 20 minutes. And I was like, what, walking? Yeah. I was like, that's fine. And then it was just, things. So it was a very different. And they are from Europe, so it wasn't even built into them but it was just the experience they'd.
Right. Oh, that's
so it's just, it's cultural, isn't it, as well?
What do you think, Luca? Like, what's the US, of course, a very car-centric society, and the cities are built for cars. Like, where do you think that comes from? How?
Well, the thing to say is that it just not happened. It's the result of a succession of choices. Actually, in the 20s of the last century, the U.S. had a fantastic railway infrastructure. Certainly, Los Angeles have one of the best railway systems in the world, and was actively demolished by the car and oil industry to create a market for cars. They bought it out and they demolished it to do that, and that happened in a number of places. So, and then you have a later decision. At the beginning, when cars started to appear in the streets of New York, there was a popular revolt against cars because kids were not safe anymore playing in the streets, and the police was trying. And then again, there was a whole lobbying, and the word jaywalking was invented then because before people could cross wherever they wanted, and it was much more self-regulating system. So the idea that the street is first of all for not just for cars but for traffic is an invention of 100 years ago. Has never been in the history of the world. So, and there are many things that we have set for granted that have been very deliberately, and of course, it's not one mastermind. It happened piece by piece, constructed. And of course, now reverting the situation, certainly in places like the US, where it's really built in the physical fabric, in the institution, in the mind, it's difficult. But it's very important to realize that these are construction, and something that being constructed can be deconstructed, or you can build something else. And sometimes we forget it. We tend to accept how things are now as a fact of nature. They are not. They are human constructions.
Yeah, and the Olympics are coming to LA in 28, mm-hmm. So they're building a new rail line to Vegas. So that's a bit like they've got the investment, they've got the plan. Because I visited California in January this year, yeah. I literally was testing. I was testing the transport system, and I just tried to go everywhere. I found the blockers. I read the plans for the Olympics. I read that they've got about 300 projects that they wanted to do, but they maybe got about 50 that are achievable. But there is, so it's, it can be also interesting that major events I also go to ADE Green, which is the festivals and events, and how festivals and events can be mini cities. So it's kind of the planning. And then what you can also bring to that is transport systems. And then as these major events come up, you can also have legacy. So then once you get the transport systems working for these pop-up events, essentially, they then help the sort of systems for the future. So
really?
Yeah, so there's, of course, these are events that bring a lot of tourism, so there's obviously the other side of the debate, but how to kind of integrate that or make that legacy or system better, that investment goes into the event, so then you can do some benefit from the outcome of it as well.
I mean, you have the
Make
flip
some
side as
benefit.
well in like Dubai, right, with the World Cup and those stadiums that they just built, and they're just standing there.
Yeah, unfortunately, many of these events are of doubtful legacy. I mean, but you know, in principle, you can try and use anything, even a crisis, to try and turn things around, give it send another direction. I mean, that could be an interesting question. I mean, the pandemic has been named. That was, of course, a huge experiment in living without mobility, or anyway with severely reduced mobility, and which was, of course, on one hand, we really realized why we needed, what we missed, but also possibilities that are, you know, that alternative ways of doing things. So and sometimes could be much more limited, you know, or also just works that have to be done somewhere, so they close some streets, and all these things, I think they should be used much. These are really moments where you become aware of how things are, how they could be different. You can see them as experiments, and you should learn from it. And doesn't mean that you have to keep it like that, because
no. For me, what the pandemic did was show that as each nation, we have the ability to shut down and start the work. You know, and as you said, it makes us look at our systems, what works and what doesn't work, but also that actually we can globally make big decisions.
Yeah.
And actually there was, of course, it wasn't good for the aviation industry, and it cost, the airlines are basically run on the sales. Their margins are very thin. So once that stops, their business model stops. Mm-hmm. So it was kind of an interesting, obviously that was a discussion in itself, that model doesn't continue to work, but it did. That then spurred on aviation to really work more on sustainable fuels and all airlines have now pretty much got a sustainability manager. So I think there's also out of crisis, that was a moment where how to improve. And in 2019, and that's what we also got involved with, was Build Back Better, Green Recovery. So there was a minister in Brussels that started this movement, and actually then a lot of corporate CEOs signed this agreement. And so it was kind of a shaking point, obviously. But then we did operate. There was limited travel. Cargo was still flying. So we kind of learned how to have a minimal. Obviously, medical supplies were being flown around as well. So that was kind of an interesting, but obviously it wasn't good for the economy. Our governments are all suffering from it now, and so are we, because of the energy crisis. All of the, we're all basically paying it back now. And I think everybody will have noticed that everything's gone up in price.
Do you think that has to do with the aviation?
I mean, it's not, no, I mean, pandemic.
But you said something interesting there. You said that due to the pandemic, the airlines were like, oh no, our whole business model relies on there not being a pandemic so that people can travel. And that made a change in them to work more on sustainability. I'm not quite sure I see that link. Like, why wouldn't they focus on, I don't know, cost reduction or, why does working on sustainability as an airline benefit them to be more future-proof against pandemics and stuff like that?
Because essentially, being a sustainable business, whether you're an airline or anyone, that if they are really understanding and getting involved with energy transition work, first of all, regulation is coming. So if they're aware of CSRD, there are some voluntary science-based targets, transition plans. But at the end of the day, and there's also the EU ETS, the Emissions Trading Scheme system in the EU, and there are similar around the world. There are systems to measure and monitor carbon, and the price is going up. So what we do in our company as well is work on transition plans, work on ESG targets, carbon reduction targets, because that obviously we know we've got a budget and we're coming close to the end of that carbon budget. So what is happening now is that governments, UN, all the bodies are making laws to make us basically reduce carbon. So it was maybe just a turning point for aviation. It was like, okay, I think it was EasyJet's CEO said sustainability will be a competitive advantage. In some ways, that's great because it takes it into another realm, another phase. It means it is part of business. And then all businesses were acknowledging, okay, that is our responsibility as well. Because at the end of the day, whether you make a table, you fly a plane, we talk about sustainable products. There's no such thing as an almost carbon-free product. It's a little bit of a myth, and as we know, the laws have come about claiming carbon neutral. You're not allowed to do it anymore because it's deemed as greenwashing, and that you don't like. At the end of the day, we are all living in a carbon-based world, and everything we do, pretty much apart from walk. Well, we need food, actually. We need carbs. But you know what I mean? I'm being a bit flippant. This is what we need.
Something interesting, because earlier you said you introduced this framework, sustainability. It starts from reducing, and then you go, if you can't reduce, you go all the way to other things, making it more efficient, etc. So my question would be, you say sustainability is becoming important for airlines. Within this is a scenario, a possibility, also considering reduction or less growth, or is that not a possibility by definition? Because that is tricky, I would say.
Pretty much every single business model is growth. There will be very few. There will be almost no CEOs in the world that will say their business model doesn't involve growth. So if you ask, I think you could pretty much. I don't know what Patagonia's CEO would say. I think they're working on different business models and things like that. But I don't think you would get any CEO say our mission is to not grow. They may say grow sustainably, or they may say we'll offset that growth.
Is this, in your view, in any way a possible source of tension with ambition of sustainability, or you think it's?
I think it's a global tension.
It is.
Yeah, because what we are starting to do is that we are getting more efficient. We are bringing low carbon solutions on board, but our population is growing and business is growing. So at first we need to get carbon neutral, but actually if we grow exponentially and then our solutions are less, then obviously that there is a delta there, and that's our discrepancy. So of course, this is why business models are at risk, and this is why also travel management companies, they're all understanding that to continue as a business, they will need to diversify. And so that's why even some of the travel management companies that we're working with also starting to even invest in sustainable fuels, because that's their scope 3 and it's in their supply chain. So that it's kind of having that bigger picture And so actually they can bring that into their business model, which I think is like from a strategic point of view, that is really thinking about your scope 1, 2 and 3. And actually that's the way to start managing it and thinking about it. But it is diversification. I've just written so I went to World Energy Congress this week in Rotterdam. All different countries, all fuel companies, solutions and everything. And of course, it's diversification. If you're an energy company, for example, now I spoke to UAE. They've got a partnership with a renewable energy company and they part own it. So, of course, there's different ways that at the end of the day, we need oil because we have not enough supply of renewables at a cheap rate. We just don't have enough supply.
Do you think it's a business model not based on growth is conceivable?
I mean,
Like we had this in our last episode, right?
Yeah.
We were talking about this where it's like, if you were to say like a company wants to make a profit so that they can continue financing whatever they're doing, and if their profit target is 10%, why not cut it down to 7% and then use that free?
I've just written this morning. No, I've just
Right?
put-
I mean, I think it's a systematic change that I would love to see
it's-
personally. Yeah.
There are some things. Basically, we work in business model development. I'm very happy that Innovate UK just called us business model disruptors and market disruptors too, because we are working out how to make new business models. So my just kind of piece of thought leadership from the World Energy Congress was, as all businesses and CEOs have a remit to their shareholders, they have got they need to deliver their shareholders a profit, and that's why they're willing to invest in them.
Right.
So that is a basic model. But I think there's maybe other trends where if it is maybe it's coming from the shareholders. Could the shareholders say, I pledge 2% of my profit back in?
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying, and I
Yeah.
think also like there's more than just shareholders, right? You have stakeholders
I mean,
as
you've
well.
got everybody. But there are some CEOs that base their salaries or bonuses are based on sustainable ESG targets, and so there is various models, but it's just not across the board. Actually, I met the guy that is the founder of Earth on Board, and he literally works with the board to convince the board that actually people, planet, profit. Don't forget planet. So, and it's a really interesting NGO, and he's, because of course the bottom line for many boards is profit, but then how many on that board are then sustainability focused? Is it gender balance? Is it all of these things? How do you make the boards represent society, represent people, planet,
Right.
but profit as well? Because that's how we run currently.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
I feel like systemic change is necessary for that.
Yeah,
And
we're talking. This is what we're talking
No, I
about.
mean,
isn't it?
it's that's why I ask. My hunch is that without different business models, we will never make the world sustainable or the economy circular. It has, and again, it's not. It has to become intrinsic, not something that you do on the side or. Okay, it's a big how. It's a big question, and again, it's not my field.
But I'm interested, Luca, because
Yes.
like we are growing, right? As population is growing, and the need for resources is growing, and I don't know what the trend is on the globalization, and like I mean, if the pandemic has maybe made it so that we want to move a bit back to localized production or whatever not, but like in terms of like urban planning and stuff like that, like if you want to be more circular, but it seems like the demand is to just keep building houses. Like, I mean, how are you?
Well, this is a discussion, and started with mobility. The whole idea again. It might, in some places it's easier than in others, and you might find all sort of better. But this idea of the 15-minute city, similar ideas are really within mobility to say, okay, but can we have the same quality or even a better quality of life by traveling less, shorter distances? So this is really with less throughput in terms of, flows, which of course at some point means that you can shift from motorized or no motorized mobility, which has also sort of advantages. It's also important to, that's when you deal with cities, you need to have the bigger picture. It's also using your bodies. It's you know, it's good for your mental and physical health. It creates also sort of opportunities for social interaction between people and the environment. It frees up public space for how it historically used to be, not just for traffic, but also for playing, socializing, et cetera, for climate adaptation measure, more green. And so, and some cities, I mean, Paris is a well-known one, but more and more are trying to explore, to at least explore this idea. Yeah, why not? I would say.
But like, I think, just thinking from like the perspective of the Netherlands, a lot of like young people, they want to live in Rotterdam, Amsterdam, or The Hague, or like the big cities, and there's just not enough space here, and it like you see it everywhere, like it overloads the trains. But in theory, and I think that a lot of municipalities struggle with this. Like I saw a thing on Groningen, you know, the city. Like a lot of students go there to study, and then afterwards they move to the bigger cities because that's where all the work is, right? I mean, ideally, if you could like disperse the population evenly across the country, maybe something like that is possible.
Yes, there are different aspects to this. One is, you said space. Actually, one of the main reasons to try and shift away from not just car dominance, but even whatever the share of the car to reduce it drastically, is because the car is the least efficient way of using space as a transportation mean. But not just marginally, 10, 20, 40 times less efficient than walking, cycling, using public transport. So the moment that your mobility significantly shift away from car use, you win a lot of space back. So you can build much denser with the same amount of public space, greenery, etc., etc. So that's one part of the story. Another part of the story, which is also part of that idea, is to say, yes, there is an enormous concentration of services and jobs in cities. Can we indeed at least preserve the services and jobs that are elsewhere, or even try and increase that so that not only cities can work as 50-minute cities, but also other parts of the country.
That makes me think of remote working, because now people have moved out of the cities. A lot of people that I know are able to work from wherever, and they've realised that it's expensive in cities, and they've bought houses out of the city and can still at least maintain a decent, a city wage while being elsewhere. So then that is improving smaller communities, because there's more people in them, and they obviously want the things that have been in the city. So I think that's a really interesting shift. But I think it's also what I'm noticing in my friends. I used to work in advertising, so my friends in advertising are thinking there's about 20% less jobs. And that's probably because the jobs are becoming more remote. And so actually you can go to different countries, and you can make, then this is changing. This is now a trend. And obviously there's some AI aspects of this, but I think it may be because actually if you're going to do this job from that place, they may pay somebody else to do it from, there's just, there are
a lot of factors at work.
These are all, obviously these were unknowns that came out of a pandemic that then a technology influenced. And so these are the sort of, and that was what was discussed at World Energy Congress. And I went to Transport Research Arena last week. Last week. A lot. And these, these unknowns and these risks, because what was being discussed by one lady was for things like energy transitions and any transition, you need to do your transition plans, but you kind of do a plan and don't know the risks. you can take as much risk as you can without breaking the economy. But obviously, you need to do these plans incrementally because things change, technology changes, society changes, risk, war, pandemic. We don't know when these are going to come. So you have to just do the plan as well as possible. Probably happens in cities. I've seen the road even be redesigned because it wasn't designed well and it kept causing accidents. So they redesigned the road. There's just examples of this in Amsterdam where they test things and that doesn't work. So they remake it.
I feel like now, for example, like I live in The Hague, and I don't want a car. I don't want to own a car, just purely because I use a lot of like the ride sharing stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And I use like the electric scooters, and I feel like it's the most superb form of transport. I go from the station, I go buy all the cars standing in line, and then when I need a car, I take one of the ride sharing cars.
Yeah.
And it's like I love that idea.
Yeah, I think. I mean, in cities like The Hague and most cities in Europe are like that, dense, diverse. Already now you can live without a car. I would even say better than with. Certainly, every once you might need a car, but
Exactly.
you can use a car sharing program. You can. And I've never had a car in Amsterdam, and it's for me it's freedom not having a car. People don't. Sometimes it's not in your mind. You need to experience it, but you're so much freer.
But if you live in a city,
Exactly.
I'm from a village. There's no way you can
But
operate.
that I was about to say. So I think cities already work like that, but you need some you don't need a lot to make cities. It's happening. At least car-free is a big word, and maybe it's also too extreme. But really, with radically less use of cars, the issue is a very different one. You also name it is the affordability. I mean, because these are really good places to live. Interesting, by the way. Car-free places are the most expensive to live in. So. It means something.
Really?
People that's where the highest prices are, not where you can most easily own and drive a car. So it says something about preferences, but indeed there are other areas which sometimes people choose, sometimes have to go it because they are much more affordable. That's why many people leave cities. There you are more dependent on a car because the distances are too big, because that's maybe the main reason. The alternatives are not there. So that's the question there. How can we create enough alternatives and make people at least not dependent on a car? Because in many places it's not a choice. It's something that you have to.
I know exactly what you mean. Where I'm from, I feel like it's also happened during the pandemic because we didn't have a lockdown, so our government did not accept that there is COVID.
Which are you from?
I'm from Belarus. Yeah, it was a funny story, but but basically what happened is the country itself kept functioning, but the thing is the borders closed because all the countries around us closed down for quarantine. So basically people couldn't leave out of the country. So they were like, okay, then I'm going to travel within the country. And so I know a few of my friends who like, okay, then we're going to take a train to another city. Oh, then we're going to like bike around to another village. So, and it was such an interesting development. And you could see how government at some point kind of understood this, and you could see like more bike lanes being repaired. You could see like it was such a fast development. I never saw bike lanes being repaired so fast. Really.
Yeah, it was response to.
Yeah.
But that's super interesting. I think these are the kind of things where we should learn from. But then I would be curious to say, and how about now? Is it still going on, this trend of it just stopped with the end of the pandemic?
I think it didn't. I think it stopped kind of improving so fast. I think the speed kind of slowed down.
Yeah.
But in general, I think right after the pandemic, because we didn't have like the electric scooters or anything, they appeared right after pandemic because there was like people found, okay, we started repairing bike lanes. Oh, then let's add another form of transportation that you can use, and that's electric. I'm home really rarely, but
I think this is super interesting because it shows how, of course, it's not chosen, but it happens, and you discover that you have many more options that you think, and of course, then it's also crucial that government or something tries and enable there with some follow-up intervention. So I think we need more of that sort of shocks and maybe also create them deliberately. But and that's actually what a lot of my research is now on this thing that we call street experiments, which is, of course, not just, it's what cities are around the world doing more and more, that is create this situation like close a street for traffic and use it in a different way, which of course generates all sorts of issues. I mean, on one hand, it shows you what you could win back, but of course, it also shows you what you might have to address because people still need to have access to important things, so how you organize that. But there are incredible learning moments to understand that a system can be changed. And and you can experience that, and so that's definitely also for me is a crucial ingredient in any transformation.
Yeah, and this is what Innovate UK have been supporting us because they can see we're also testing and coming up with different pilots, and they so at the transport research arena it was mostly about research in mobility. It was loads of different universities and projects and pilots, and the EU. So we are going for an EU grant which is for mobility, and it's about policy and governance, and then within it they are asking for initiatives at community engagement level. So it's really good that because you want grants, but there's not always a grant for what you're doing. But which is why you do need to spend time with policymakers and things like that. But this one specifically is because they're understanding that actually community-led initiatives are the most successful because they've already done a small pilot, tested it out, like Luca was saying. Did it work? Didn't it work? And actually, once you can see it's working for this city or this street, you can then scale it and adapt it. And that's what the European Commission are granting, facilitating. Mm-hmm. So then it can. This is which is why I support the EU. This is the good thing about, then it goes across the member states. And when you do these grants, put these grants together in consortium, you get other countries involved, and then it disseminates it. So this is what we're going to be doing this year, finding our partners. And that's why that conference is really good, because it helps you find partners. And then you see, and I saw drones being tested at airports, and how does it fit in with the current system? And that can be for deliveries and medical supplies. So there's just so many interesting pilots going on.
Yeah,
I think it is.
What's the most interesting one you saw?
I quite liking the drones. Well, not that it's, but they did also say things like the drones are going to deliver food, and I thought we don't need drones to deliver food.
Wasn't there like a few years ago a thing in the US where they tested a drone that was like bring the food and like dropped with the food?
I'm not sure about that one, but there was also mountain rescue. So if people are up the mountains and then there was no visibility, a drone about this big could go up, operate with zero visibility. Obviously, that's quite specific to mountain areas, but there's a lot of there was a lot of simulations with I think the drones are pretty interesting. But of course, there's like the e-bikes who are taking over like a lot of cars. People are getting an e-bike. They say, I don't need a car. I can get around with da-da-da. I think that these are going to be the sort of ones, because if you look at the charts for EU, it is cars that are the main single journey, single passenger, single driver car journeys. They are still about 60% of our EU emissions. So if you can do some basically displacement, and of course, EV. So I also saw Extreme E. They were testing hydrogen cell. So there was all of these. Obviously, these are small pilots and projects happening, but it's kind of. And then sustainable fuels, of course. I'm working in sustainable fuels, so that is starting to happen more and things like that.
Well, I remember reading something on your website about the sustainable aviation fuel being way more expensive than traditional fuel. Mm-hmm. And I think, I feel like everything sustainable is more expensive somehow. Like it's always like a trade-off.
But can I just say that?
Yeah,
it's
sure.
Because it's like any technology, that curve, you get new technology, we don't have scales of economy for it. As soon as it becomes more mass produced, like cars, like mobile phones, they were all really, TVs, all really expensive. But when that's where you need society to say, yes, we want to do this, because it's businesses, you need a market. So
well, that was the thing. Like I was wondering, like how you keep it affordable and like inclusive for everyone. Because it's
it might be also an issue that the market's not working, that the prices are not right. So they are sending signals that do not respect problems because maybe they're really short term, whereas these problems are more longer term. Yeah. But that the fact that being not sustainable is not punished enough on the market. You don't pay too high a price, so why being sustainable? Suppose, and of course part of it is because many of the problems are created in the future. Climate change is the biggest one. The big problems are already now, but the biggest. But the market is not reacting. It's not that things creating those problems are much more expensive and things are flying was an example. Flying is much more simpler and cheaper than taking a train, whereas the train is 5 to 10 times less impactful in the environment. So there are many signs that the market is not functioning, and the solution there are two ways. The economists say, we should this thing that externalize, we should internalize that. We should bring back in the economy so that the market can react to these things. And the other maybe is what you were saying, well, the market it can do that. It should be political decision. We should decide for different reasons that we want to go in one or the other direction.
Some of the things are political will, and it has to be, if it's big like energy supply, then you need, politics involved and things like that. But I think there is interesting startups happening, and maybe it's more expensive, but I also just read the US consumer market is 14 trillion now alone. That the investment we need for climate adaptation apparently is 7 trillion. So there is actually, and that's consumer spending. So, and what do we spend money on?
Yeah, but to be fair, in the US, the consumerism topic is like really huge. And I recently read an article about it, is that since the pandemic ended, it seemed like, so the pandemic started, there was like initial shock, so there was like a little slump, and then people stuck at home, access to internet, access to like buying, and then there is a big jump in consumption again.
So we have, not everybody, of course, but the nations that have disposable income have got the capacity to, and I was just doing some research, so 28%, if it includes some sort of sustainability association or claim, then it's 28% more popular, and then if it doesn't, it's 20% less popular. So that's kind of, it shows that the consumer market is going in that direction. So in some ways you can lead people to buying it. And actually, even though it's more expensive, we spend a lot of money on stuff we don't need quite often.
Yeah, and let also, again, it's like all things are constructed. The market is also shaped. It's not, and let me give you another example about mobility. Parking space in cities heavily subsidized. So what visitor, but especially resident, pay for a parking spot has no relation whatsoever with the price of that ground if it were sold on the market. So the whole society is heavily subsidizing car owners to get a free or very cheap parking spot of their house. I mean, it's a political choice. Maybe it's valuable, but it's not a market transaction. So if it were such a parking in Amsterdam, there are different researchers also being precise about that, would be 10 times as expensive. And then we will have a very different dynamics in public space than now. I mean, and again, so it's important to be watchful for this. It's not just happening in a natural way. It also happened one of these days that Europe approved a law, which of course has been. It was much more radical at the beginning, but it's forcing the biggest company in Europe, at least, to take responsibility of sustainability, but also human rights of the whole production chain.
The CS-DDD, yeah?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So again, it's very important that this is super important, that you need this environment, and then let markets be creative and firms and entrepreneurs. But without these clear signals, why would they? I mean, of course, you can have some very ethical somebody, but they have to survive. So if the environment, the business environment, is not sending the signals.
And as you know how cities are evolved, if we think of how a new country was evolved, basically the first things that come are utilities and a law system. Mm-hmm. Would you say that? To make
it's a big mixture of things, there are a lot of feedback cycles, it's a complex system, but these are definitely a very important component.
These are like some of the first things, because people, that's our version of society. We think we need laws, and we think we need new utilities so that we've got water and energy. That's evolved, obviously. How that energy comes to us, that's still evolving now. But these are kind of things and then they're lawmakers, and they say, you can do this, you can't do this, because people don't. I guess that's the assumption, that people do what they want. So it's kind of saying we need these things. So actually, we've got these things, and that was kind of my discussion point, is that we've got these things in place, but what is the blockers? And actually is that we're heavily reliant on cheap energy. Yeah. So we are evolving that, and the fuel companies are. And now, actually 4,000 businesses have signed up to science-based targets, which is great, but there are 350 million companies in the world. Yeah. So I think, we are... and I think that is a great initiative, and there are, great NGO and things like this, but it's literally the magnitude of the issue is that we've got a lot of work to do, and, and so I think that's why we are doing our work, and that a lot of startups are starting to do this, which is great, because, like I was saying, I started to think about the circular economy in 2018, and it just wasn't, it was still in the UN, it was still in Brussels and policymakers, but this last few years, it's just like...
And maybe the interesting exercise for policymakers could be, I think you named Patagonia at one point. We have some examples of companies that are really trying different ways. So then the exercise would be, okay, how we create a system of laws and things where firms like Patagonia are not the exception but the rule. Mm-hmm. How can we... that would be a very interesting exercise.
I mean, I've obviously thought about this a lot, setting up a business from scratch. You have to think about everything.
But how to create an environment in terms of regulations that makes... Because makes the appearance and thriving of companies like Patagonia.
Yeah, because that was the point in our first episode as well. It's like, I think like the companies is like the oil companies that were like oh yeah, no, I'd gladly be more sustainable,
Oh, yeah.
but then it will cost me more. And if they are not sustainable, yeah, then I'm losing out.
Yeah.
So it's like a kind of like
If everyone does that, we will do
if
it.
yeah, we would do it if everyone would. Do
Well,
it. And that's-
then you learn from that. What is the message there? That actually is influence. So I've got a bit of a print thing, like if people, like when you saw obviously Greta, you can see emotionally driven. Actually, with sustainability, I was logically driven because I didn't know so much about it before I looked in. I knew I could recycle and things like that, but then I thought, that makes sense. We should do this. And then I think there's just various ways that people are change or influence, so emotionally, logically, or influence. So actually, I'm working in sports and going across different music actually, and when you come to people that not researching cities and sustainable aviation fuel, who is, not everyone wants to be academically involved, but actually they might be if their favorite band DJ. It's like it takes it into a different conversation then, and that's why I kind of got that. Okay, I'm interested in this cause. It's just an approach. So I always think of it in these three ways.
Yeah. Well, just I think a nice, good topic to close things off here on circularity. I mean, obviously, like mobility and housing and travel are all like things we do, and they create carbon, they cost resources. How are you seeing in your respective fields that these resources are trying to be extracted and reused again? Maybe we can start with you, Sarah, in the travel.
Travel is working on changing because, of course, if we travel, there's active travel, so we can talk about walking, cycling, and now e-bikes. Obviously, we need some electricity from that. So we've got a version of travel that can be the carbon-free or carbon neutral. Then we have to go up the spectrum. Obviously, I'm working with aviation who's relying heavily on fuel. So the thing that people can do is look at renewable fuels. The planes right now, and they're not going to, with the discussion of hydrogen, our plane's going to run on hydrogen. Now that's just such a change to the systems that actually a lot of the people modelling the energy mixers say that isn't the best use of resources. If we have a deadline, if we are working to reduce carbon by that date, use carbon for industry and industrial purposes. So there's just, if you look to it, speak with economists, they have different approaches. So I'm kind of doing a long version of this answer. So basically, everyone is starting to work in renewables as much as they can. Recycling hydrocarbons, looking at alternative sources. If you can reduce or change to another fuel or way of working, like EV, of course, hydrogen fuel cells, trains that run on electric, if they can run on renewables, even better. There's electric planes are on the way. Small hydrogen planes are on the way. So it's basically decarbonize the system as much as possible, change cars to displace cars with e-bikes and do as much of that. My work also in biofuels for trucks and things like this. So change all of these to transition fuels. So it's all happening, but whether there's enough supply, obviously these are the debates. How do we get more supply? We need people to invest in it, but we also need people to buy it. That's the tricky one. You need the customer to buy it. It does need to be the right price. And then if it isn't the right place, unblock it. Make a new business model. Make a new way to pay for it. Make a new incentive.
But all these new systems like electric planes or like electric cars and stuff like that, don't they, like, we have existing cars, like doesn't that just add on to the...
It does. If you just decide all of those are scrapped, that is a problem. But this is why governments, industries have a phase out plan. There is no, and that's why we've got these milestones of 20, 30, 40, 50, because the reality is, just like anything, you need it to phase out. And actually, people that have got the most wealth and the most disposable income can take that new innovation on, new technology. That group will switch quickly. Actually, this group doesn't have as much money, but actually maybe they could switch to bikes, e-bike. There's just different ways to do it. So it's understanding this topic and what can you do the fastest, who can you influence, how can you encourage that? Is it grants? Is it new green products? How can we get people greener energy at a better price? So this is what we're going through, working out all of these problems, blockers, and unblocking them.
Luca?
Yeah, for the sake of discussion, let's say that we have two options. One is to accept the system as it is. So societies, economies heavily dependent on mobility. On mobility of, in great amount and growing, and then trying to make it more efficient. And I think Sarah named a lot of ways in which you can do that. I think that's much less controversial. I don't know whether it will ever be enough, but let's put it there. The other is to question how we live our life and organize our economies, and ask, do we really need all this mobility? What do we need? What do we not need? But of course, going that way, which is more difficult, to me much more interesting, is also asking, okay, how do we want to live? What is a good life? It's also getting back an agency as humans that can make choices about the good and the bad, and not just accept the world they happen to be in. Right. More difficult, much more difficult, but maybe with a greater potential of making that really transformation, which I think we need if we really have to become sustainable or circular.
If we want to become sustainable, and we want that, of course, because we talked about what governments can do and what companies can do, especially in the field of sustainable mobility, what we as people, like what we are in the room, can do, like really today, tomorrow, to somehow maybe influence for the better the field of sustainable mobility.
Well, I think that again, it's very important what you said. I don't think we should say it's all up to individual or it's all up to consumers. There are huge responsibility of government and business, but of course we are all part of the problem and the solution. I think people as individuals, and not as experts or professionals or academics, should and could do is experiment, try different things out. Again, not with the idea, I'm gonna change the world or even change my life or it's gonna work, but try different things, not accept things as they are, not do necessarily what everybody's doing, and then share with others this experience and etc. And then maybe based on that learning, lobby governments, lobby firms, but live in a more exploratory way.
Yeah, and I've actually, while I was thinking, I decided to create something called carbon fasting. Whereas,
that's an experiment indeed.
Yes, carbonfasting.com. I did get the URL. No, because I thought, me and my friends always used to do the 5 and 2 diet. So on 2 days of the week, you just eat less.
Okay.
And I thought, that's because sometimes, you don't want to eat, this is obviously thinking of it from a food perspective, but in a way, you can also do this with carbon. For me, I have veggie days. I reduce the meal. I do all of these things. I take the train to London and things like that. And I do as much as I can to reduce my own carbon. But then I know that I have days where I need to fly. I need to do this. I need to do that. I've switched to green electricity. So do as much as you can and afford within your abilities, and then you can leave your other days for things. But if you did that on the whole, then you will average out using less carbon. So I think as and then I've worked with something like 50 students, and they are then going into the workforce as sustainability managers, advocates. They're working towards sustainable businesses. So I think there's a lot. Yeah, there's a few different ways.
It'd be actually funny if you do that. You might uncover opportunities, right? To think differently.
I think indeed. But every once you should really try out something a bit extreme. Just to learn. Maybe really say for a year I will not fly at all. Let's see what happens. Again, you can't do that maybe. But I mean, I've many colleagues that now are really trying to seriously question their flying, which is for academic has been the most obvious things to do, and really but also just to understand what am I losing? Are there alternatives or not alternatives? Again, the point should not be nobody can be pure. We are all part of this world, but to try things that are different enough to really learn something new, not to do what everybody knows. I mean, some things are obvious. And we should do that, eat less meat, fly less, this and that. But everyone tries something a bit crazier, just to explore possibilities, not to say that's the solution or I can do it. Maybe after a few weeks you say, no, that's too much for me. But you have learned something about you and so about the world, because we are all parts of the world.
It's a good one.
Yeah, I hope people who listen will be like, okay, yeah, I'll try. I really do hope so.
There's so many businesses in Amsterdam that are... Amsterdam is a big pot of innovation in all of these, don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like a big challenge as well for people, and I'm wondering what you have to say about this, but a big challenge for finding... It's connecting people that want to do something to the places where they can do something.
Yeah, that's true.
And I don't know if you have any tips or places that you're like, okay, if you really want to make an impact on sustainable mobility, go check out this place.
Yeah, I have a colleague who started working part-time at university to create this infrastructure in society, and it's called the Lab of Thought. So go look that up. I mean, it's not the only example, but it's really one example trying to create a forum for people who really want to try out, try out different stories about how things are and follow that up. Okay. But that's one.
The Lab of Thought. Okay, I wrote it down.
All right. Well, I think we need to round off. We could keep going for hours. Yeah. But it's getting dark outside. And,
Yep. Thank you so much for joining us. It was a pleasure to have this chat. And thank you everyone who was listening. It was Pop and Bubbles podcast, episode 2 of season 2 on sustainable mobility. I'm your host, Lise.
And I'm Stefan. And thank you all and have a good night.
Thank you.